All right. Almost lost one of the screens there, but it looks like we are all good to go. So we're going to get into the podcast very shortly. And today, guys, we're going to be talking about what separates the best athletes. Now, there's a lot of reasons that I wanted to bring this one to you guys because obviously the goal of this show is to speak to exactly that, to speak to the difference between the good and the great, to speak to the difference between the mediocre and the good, to continue to touch on exactly what creates the highest level athletes in the world and exactly what you can do in order to help put yourself among those names and among those numbers. Now, give me just one quick second because my cat is trying to get out of the room. There you go. And now let's get into it. So we're going to talk about what separates the best athletes, and we're going to go here in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the number one show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I'm your host, Kenny Dusseault, and today we are talking about what separates the best athletes. Now, obviously, the goal of this show is to help you go from good to great in your career, help you build your dream career in sport, like I say in the introduction every single time. Now, this one came to me a few days ago. I was watching a video, and it was talking about UFC fighter Dustin Poirier, and it was talking about what allowed Dustin Poirier to make that pivot in his career, go on the big win streaks that he's gone on, and truly become one of the best in the world. Like, he was always good, but what was that difference and what was that turning point? And they spoke about Poirier's first fight with Conor McGregor, where Conor got in his head. He was just angry the whole time, and things just obviously really didn't go his way, if you follow that sport at all, and how he was able to switch that up, and the differences between him when they fought the first time and him when they fought both the second and third time, when he obviously came away with the wins in both of those fights. And what the video was talking about was stoicism. Now, I'm not going to go super in depth into the definition. I'd be lying to you if I said I've done a ton of research into this topic, but I do know a little bit about what it means. But it did bring up a lot for me that I felt like could be very valuable to you guys as well. And when it was talking in the video, they were talking about Dustin's biggest changes from the first fight to the second and third, and how basically the main thing that changed was he didn't let Conor get in his head. When Conor would trash talk, he would just let it go. When he would say things, Dustin would just kind of laugh. If you watched their third press conference, I couldn't get through the whole thing because honestly, Conor's trash talk was just cringy. But if you watch that press conference, Conor is going off. He's, saying this, saying that, trying to bring up all the old things that he used to say that got under Dustin's skin, calling him a hillbilly, calling him a bitch. He had that weird line about your wife being your husband. And he was going off on Dustin. And the whole time, Dustin just sat back and smiled and sat back and laughed and sat back and talked about how he was going to win the fight and didn't get into that battle with Conor. And this is what I wanted to touch on today. Now, obviously, a lot of you guys won't be facing, maybe the same level of onslaught as a situation like that. But a lot of you guys face things in your day-to-day life or in your careers that you let get to you and you let push you into, that mental battle instead of focusing on exactly what you need to focus on. One of the lines that I heard in an interview from Dustin Poirier talking about that first fight compared to the other two was he learned over time that he's fighting another man's style. He's not fighting another man. It's like, if you don't like the guy and you take the stuff into the fight, you take all the personal stuff in there and you're just trying to inflict pain because you don't like him, you're going to get sloppy. You're going to make mistakes. He's going to beat you. But if you focus on beating his style, if you focus on what does he do well, how do I counter it, what do I do well, and what's going to be the game plan to beat him, then you're going to be able to come away with the win, which ultimately is what matters. Now, why I felt this was really important, why I wanted to bring this to all of you was because, like I said, this is something that so many of you overlook. This is something that so many of you get caught in it's the personal side, oh, somebody said something you didn't like, so now you need to get into that battle with them and say something back. Oh, this guy thinks that he's going to dominate you, so I'm going to go out of my way to prove that I'm going to dominate him at his game instead of mine, which, sometimes you might be able to do, but honestly, is a pretty fucking stupid way of going about a fight. If your goal is to win the fight and this guy's talking shit about your wrestling and you know that you're actually a way better striker than he is, why would you go in there and just try to wrestle? The only reason is ego. The only reason you're doing that is to try to prove something to yourself that you don't need to be proving. The goal in the end is to come away with the win. That's it. And so when it comes to these ego battles that I see so many athletes get into, I have to prove that I'm better than him at his game. No, you don't. You have to prove that over 15 minutes, you can beat him under the rules that you're fighting under. That's it. And if you do that enough times, you move up to higher level promotions. And then you do that enough times there, you can make your living from the sport. And if you keep doing that enough times successfully, in the end, you are the one who gets to make their living in the sport, retire their family, have that, beautiful life that you're after. But if you're spending all your time trying to prove to everyone how tough you are, trying to prove to everyone how good you are, trying to prove that you're better than this guy at this specific element, you're going to get sidetracked from the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is success in the sport. The ultimate goal is success in the sport, always. And so instead of trying to prove, to your ego that you're this or you're that, focus on success in the sport. Focus on beating the style. And so what I wanted to, touch on with regards to that as well is I really enjoyed that interview, the interview with Dustin specifically, but then that other video talking about, the changes he was able to make and how he didn't let any of the trash talk or anything like that get under his skin. He just focused on the game plan. And yeah, when it comes to the actual fight, obviously we just touched on that. But one other area where I see a lot of athletes get stuck with this is in training. So many athletes are spending their time so desperate to prove that they work harder than everyone that they forget the ultimate goal of training is to set you up for success in the sport. So they're training 3, 4, 5 hours a day just to walk around and flex about how they train 3, 4, 5 hours a day. And they're not thinking about what that training's actually going to do to benefit them. And I want to preface this again, because I hear this too many times. This is not me saying that hard work is not important. This is not me telling you not to work hard. Any of that bullshit, just stop. What this is me telling you that you need intention behind the work you're doing when you're training. It needs to mean something. You can train an hour and a half a day, get a lot out of that hour and a half, and get way further, way faster than the guy who's in the gym for 4 hours every single day. The reason is because you have intention. You have intention behind what you're doing. You know what you're going in there to do. You know what you're going in there to improve. And as a result, you're able to get the results faster. And if you can get the results faster and they can translate more effectively to what you need in the sport, you win. So instead of spending your time focusing on proving to everyone how much harder you work than they do, on proving to everyone that, you do the hardest, worst, most brutal conditioning ever, start focusing on what is this training actually going to do to help me win the fight? Because I will say it until I am blue in the face, running 10 kilometers a day is not the way to properly condition for fighting. I'm going to say that one more time. Running 10 kilometers a day is not the proper way to condition for fighting. Why? Because think about how long it takes you to run a 10K. Think about the pace in which you run a 10K. Is that remotely similar to the pace you fight at? No. Is the timeline remotely similar to the timeline you fight for? No. So why do you think that just going out and doing that every day is properly conditioning you for the sport? Because your ego is telling you that is more work than other people are willing to do. So I'm going to do that so that I could show how much harder I work than everybody else. Whereas A lot of athletes of mine, the conditioning work that they're doing 2 to 3 times a week is 12 to 18 minutes at the end of their session. And the reason is because we're focused on moving at a high pace, we're focused on being explosive, and we're focused on being able to repeat it for the duration of the fight. Now, this doesn't mean every single session needs to be exactly the duration of your fight, but you should be focused on being explosive, being fast, and being high paced through your conditioning work, because that's what translates to the fight. That's what you need when you're in there. Some days, and I've had multiple athletes of mine tell me this, some days they feel like they're not working hard enough. I've had athletes tell me, I feel like I don't do enough. And then I ask them, well, how do you feel when you're training? Oh, I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. How do you feel in your last fight? Oh, I felt better than I've ever felt in my whole life. Cool. That's what we're after. The guy who works the hardest is not the one who wins. The guy who is the best prepared is the one who wins. Hard work is an important part of that. Don't get me wrong. The sessions that we do, any of my athletes can attest to this. The sessions that we do that are 12 to 18 minutes pushing at the end of the session are hard. They're working when they're doing that. They're not slacking. It's not easy, but it's preparing for what they're actually competing in, instead of just preparing for walking around with your chest puffed out, talking about how fucking badass you are. So start thinking about how what you're doing is actually preparing you for the sport, and stop thinking about just trying to do more than everyone else. Because as we said since the start of this episode, the goal is always success in the sport. And coming back to that original piece that I talked about, that interview with Dustin Poirier and that video talking about, the changes he was able to make from the first time he fought McGregor to the second and third times, the focus remained internal. The focus remained internal. And one other thing I love that I heard Dustin say about that is during every fight camp, he draws out 2 circles. I can't remember exactly how it goes, so bear with me if I'm not quite correct. Draws out 2 circles. One has everything that he can control, and the second one has everything he can't control. Now, the first one is everything that he focuses on, because the second one he can't control, so he doesn't let it affect his mind. And he said every time during the camp that he gets frustrated about something or worried about something or is, dealing with some issues, he looks back at those 2 circles, and if it's in the circle that he can control, he addresses it and he fixes the problem. If it's in the circle he can't control, he lets it go. And something that simple speaks to me so much because, whether it's building a business, whether it's building an athletic career like so many of you guys are, whatever it is you're doing, your ability to let those little things go, your ability to not get sucked into the things that you have no control over, that is going to be a massive part of your ability to be successful in the sport. And so little lessons like from this interview, what I really want you guys to take away from this, if I can really put my finger on one thing, is that you need to be able to let go the things that you can't control. If you're facing a Conor McGregor style guy that's, talking all the shit and all that, you got to understand he's doing that to get a rise out of you. And if you give him the rise, that's energy that's going into being pissed at him instead of energy that's going into what you need to do to beat him. If you're going into the fight just focused on, I'm going to inflict pain, you're not going into the fight thinking, I'm going to be smart, tactical, and I'm going to win the fight. You're going to get sloppy. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to lose. But if your focus is on beating the style and not beating the person, if your focus is on what you can control and not what you can't control, these are those little things that are going to allow you to separate yourself, that are going to allow you to become that greatest version of you every single time you step back in the sport. So that is it. That is all. I appreciate everybody who tuned in. As always, my goal is to impact the lives and careers of as many athletes as I can. So if you got value from the show today, my one ask of you, share it to your social media, to a friend, to a coach, to a teammate, to someone who is going to benefit from hearing this message. And if you do share it, tag me in it. I always love seeing that people are watching the show. I always love seeing that people are getting value from the show. So I'd love to know what it is you're taking away so that I can touch more on that in future episodes as well. So thank you again. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.